They said Elias Crow had ice in his veins and blood on his hands, and in the border town of Red Willow, rumors were treated like scripture. His name crept through saloons and feed stores, rode in on the backs of passing traders, and settled into conversations like dust that never quite left. Some claimed he'd once faced 3 men alone in a snowstorm and only one came back down the mountain. Others swore he spoke more to wolves than to people. No one truly knew, but everyone agreed on one thing. Elias Crow was not a man you crossed, and certainly not a man you married unless you had no other choice. Clara Whitmore had no other choice. She stood at the edge of the church steps, the wood warm beneath the thin soles of her shoes, her breath shallow and uneven. The dress she wore had belonged to her mother once, altered hastily by a neighbor whose hands shook as much as Clara's did now. The lace at the sleeves scratched her skin, and the veil felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried every whispered fear of the town. Her father stood behind her, hat crushed in his hands, eyes rimmed red, not just from shame, but from relief. His debt would be settled today. Hers would begin. When the church doors opened, the sound of boots against wood echoed inside, too loud in the sudden hush. Elias Crow stepped into view. He was taller than Clara had imagined, broader too, his presence filling the doorway as naturally as the mountains filled the horizon. His coat was dark and worn smooth at the elbows, his beard neatly trimmed, his hair pulled back at the nape of his neck. He removed his hat as he entered, holding it against his chest for a moment, and that simple gesture sent a ripple through the pews. Clara risked a glance at his face. His eyes were gray, not the cold steel she'd expected, but something quieter, more watchful. He did not leer. He did not smirk. He looked at her the way a man looked at a storm rolling in, aware of its power, respectful of its danger. The ceremony passed in a blur. The preacher's voice droned on about duty and union, words that felt hollow and far away. When Elias took her hand, his grip was firm but careful, as if he knew how easily bones could break. His palm was warm, calloused, human. That startled her more than anything else. When the final words were spoken and the preacher declared them husband and wife, the congregation shifted, releasing a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Clara felt something tighten in her chest, not panic this time, but a sharp, aching grief for the life she was leaving behind. Elias offered his arm, waiting without pressure. After a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, she accepted. Outside, the sky stretched wide and pale, the mountains distant but watchful. Elias's horse was already hitched, supplies packed neatly along the saddle. Clara noticed how methodical everything was, nothing thrown together in haste. He helped her mount with practiced ease, keeping his eyes respectfully averted as she settled in. The ride was long and quiet. Red Willow faded behind them, the familiar landmarks giving way to dense pine forests and winding paths that seemed to exist only because Elias knew where to look. The air grew cooler as they climbed, carrying the scent of sap and stone. Clara's thoughts churned, every creak of leather and snap of twig setting her nerves on edge. Elias broke the silence once, pointing ahead with his chin. That creek swells fast come spring. Best not cross it after heavy rain. She nodded, unsure what to say. It wasn't a threat or a warning meant to frighten her, just information, offered plainly. Later, when the wind picked up and cut through her thin shawl, he stopped without a word, removed his coat, and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, smelling faintly of smoke and pine. "Thank you," she murmured, surprised by how small her voice sounded. He inclined his head, as if thanks were something he accepted but didn't expect. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had begun to settle. The structure stood sturdy against the slope, built of thick logs and stone, its roof weighted against winter storms. A stack of firewood sat neatly to one side, and the porch boards were swept clean. Clara had imagined darkness, clutter, something wild and unkempt. Instead, she saw care. Inside, a fire crackled softly in the hearth. A table was set for two, simple plates, clean cups, a loaf of bread resting beneath a cloth. A kettle steamed gently. Clara stopped just inside the door, unsure what to make of it all. Elias set her bags down the hall. "You'll have your own room," he said, his voice low and steady. "Door locks from the inside." She turned to face him fully then, searching his expression. "Why?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. "Why to all this?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because your father's land mattered to him. And because I needed a legal wife to secure my claim. That's the truth of it." He paused, then added, "I won't take more than what's agreed." Something in his tone, plain, unvarnished, cut through the fear that had wrapped around her heart for weeks. This was not kindness meant to trap her. It was boundaries, clearly drawn. That night, Clara lay awake in the small room at the end of the hall, listening to the fire settle and the wind brush against the cabin walls. The door remained unlocked. No footsteps approached. No voice demanded her attention. Slowly, the terror she'd carried up the mountain loosened its grip, replaced by a cautious, fragile hope she hadn't expected to feel. Winter did not arrive politely in the mountains, it came like a verdict. One morning the world was gray and brittle, and by nightfall snow pressed against the cabin walls as if trying to listen in. Clara learned the rhythms of the place quickly, because the mountains demanded attention. She learned how to split kindling without numbing her fingers, how to hang herbs where smoke wouldn't spoil them, how to read the sky the way Elias did, by the weight of clouds and the way the wind changed its mind. Elias never treated her like a burden or a prize. He showed her where things were, explained why they were there, then stepped back and let her choose. Some days they worked side by side in silence, a quiet that felt earned rather than forced. Other days, he told her stories while mending traps or sharpening tools, short accounts of storms survived, trails lost and found again, people who had come and gone from his life like seasons. He never spoke of violence, and Clara noticed that when he did mention danger, it was always as something to be avoided, not sought. Word still traveled, even up the mountain. A trader brought news one afternoon, stamping snow from his boots and glancing at Elias with wary respect. There were men in Red Willow asking questions. A mining boss named Harlan Pike had taken an interest in the ridge that bordered Elias's land. Pike was known for buying what he wanted or breaking those who wouldn't sell. The trader's voice dropped as he spoke, as if the mountains themselves might carry his words. That night, Elias spread papers across the table, deeds, maps, receipts marked with careful ink. Clara watched him work, the firelight catching in his eyes. "He'll try to provoke me," Elias said quietly. "That's how men like Pike operate. If I strike first, I lose." "And if he comes here?" Clara asked. Elias looked up at her then, really looked, as if weighing more than the question. "Then I'll protect what's mine without becoming what they expect." The snow deepened, trails vanished. Clara felt the isolation press in, but it was different now, shared. When footsteps finally crunched outside the cabin weeks later, they both heard it. Elias held up a hand, calm, and left his rifle by the door. Men rode into view, hard-faced and loud against the quiet white. Harlan Pike dismounted first, his coat too fine for the cold, his smile sharp and practiced. Behind him, townsfolk gathered at a cautious distance, drawn by rumor and fear. "So this is the den," Pike called out. "I expected more teeth." Elias stepped onto the porch, hands open. "You're trespassing." Pike laughed, the sound brittle. "I'm negotiating." "There's nothing to negotiate." Pike's eyes slid past Elias and landed on Clara standing in the doorway. "Didn't think the stories were true," he said. "You clean up the place nice." Elias's voice dropped, firm as stone. "Leave." Instead of drawing a weapon, Elias nodded once to Clara. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, clutching the ledger he'd prepared her to hold. She opened it, pages fluttering in the cold air, and spoke clearly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "The claim is lawful, filed, witnessed, paid in full. Any challenge has already been answered." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Pike's smile faltered as he recognized the seals, the signatures. He hadn't expected paper. He'd expected blood. "You think this ends it?" Pike snapped. Before Elias could answer, a rider pushed through the crowd, the sheriff, breathless, papers in hand. The decision had come down faster than Pike had planned. His claim was void. His methods had finally caught up with him. The mountain seemed to exhale as Pike mounted again, rage contained only by the law he despised. The riders left, their noise fading into the trees. Silence returned, deeper than before. Later, by the fire, Elias poured coffee into 2 cups. "You were brave," he said, not as praise, but as fact. "So were you," Clara replied. "You could have scared them off." He met her gaze. "Fear burns everything it touches." When the storm eased and the days grew longer, Elias laid the truth before her. The debt was paid. The danger had passed. She was free to go if she wished. Clara looked around the cabin, the care in every joint, the life they'd built in small, deliberate choices. She thought of the man who had shocked everyone not by living up to his reputation but by defying it. "I'll stay," she said softly. "Not because I'm forced. Because I choose to." Elias nodded, a smile barely there, but real. Outside, the mountains stood watch, no longer a place of fear, but of quiet beginnings.